Andrew, start off by telling us how you've been influenced by John Moore.
Well, how it began was I was writing a series of books set in a fictionalized version of this part of the world called the Libmouth series. And when I was writing the first one, I was having a drink with an old journalist I knew, an old local journalist, and he said, "Have you read John Moore?" He said, "You really need to read John Moore for your research." And I'm ashamed to say I'd never heard of him. This was in the middle of the 90s. But I found some second-hand copies of the Brensham trilogy, and I began to read them, and I realised this was just what I needed, because my Libmouth series is set in the 50s in a part of the world where it's still a provincial centre. There's a community there. It's a small market town with a hinterland around it, self-contained. And it didn't take me long to realise that Elmbury is just that. Elmbury with its villages, its farms, its marketplace, its great church. Well, that was exactly what I needed. And so I plundered that 3 books of the Brensham trilogy, not just for characters, not just for the details, though some of those crept in, but also for that sense of a closely knit community where all classes of society knew each other and were interrelated. And that's one of the great things I think you get from the Brensham trilogy, that sense of a society, a world that's complete of itself. If I could read you a bit. This is in a letter he wrote to the fictionalized John Moore figure during the war in 1944, when the real and the fictional John Moore was caught up with the D-Day landings and elsewhere. And Mr. Chawton wrote, "The best of Elmbury, I think, is something pretty important and something which the world would be much poorer for losing. We are in our way a rather highly civilized community. We've achieved quite a sensible sort of relationship among ourselves." And I think that's what you get from these books, this sense of a community that it works all together. All the bits are joined up. It's lovely.
And how much could you relate to John Moore creating this fictional place, but that was actually based on somewhere that was real?
I didn't have any problem with that, because anyone who writes fiction, as I'm sure Moore himself knew, plunders reality in every shape and form. I mean, just as Moore did with Elmbury, the Elmbury he described, the central character, the I, it's not Moore. Elmbury is not Tewkesbury, but he's sort of stolen elements of it and warped them and elided bits here and expanded bits there. But for example, I mean, when the first of my Libmouth books, An Air That Kills, has some slums in it, which are about to be pulled down, and that idea came directly from Elmbury. There's a wonderful scene in the first book, A Portrait of Elmbury, and where the infant John Moore is looking out of his nursery window straight across the road into the slums of Double Alley and the strange characters who live there. And it wasn't the precise details of the location of the middle class house on one side of the road, the slums on the other, that interested me. It was the idea that these things could be, the middle classes could be cheek by jowls with the slums, and these strange characters should be inhabiting it.
Now, you've been here today at the John Moore Museum delivering a workshop, and the focus this time was specifically on character and characterisation, wasn't it?
Mm.
When you're talking then to budding writers, what sort of tips are you sharing with them about creating those memorable characters?
I think one of the things that John Moore does very well with his characters is that he can hone in on some particular quality that makes them instantly memorable. There's Cousin Fred, who is a lawyer, a particular favourite, a man of metronomic regularity, who simply vanished by train with £1.7 in his pocket and was never seen again. Now, having read that about somebody, you don't forget that person. It's those details. It's not so much he was a lawyer and he vanished by train. A lot of people do that. It's the fact he had £1.7 in his pocket. It's that little detail that lodges in the mind. Well, there's the hermit in his folly. Did you know the hermit in the Mad Lord's Folly, who actually charges visitors to go up his folly? Charges. He's not. You expect a hermit to be terribly otherworldly, but this hermit seems to be a right little capitalist. But it's more had this wonderful grasp of the incongruities of characters and their eccentricities, and he celebrates them, I think, in these books.
What do you enjoy about coming to deliver a workshop then to budding writers?
I think the greatest thing, the great privilege, is that you can spend, in this case we spent 3 hours talking about our shared craft. And I spend most of my working life writing, and it's a real pleasure to step back from that and actually talk about what we do, the nuts and bolts of it, and to think about that. And I sometimes think I learn as much from them as they learn from me, because it's a sharing of ways of doing things, and it's very humbling too, to think that all the time these new, growing, aspiring writers are springing up. We're part of a big tradition, as Moore was himself, that goes back a very long way.
It must be quite nice to meet people like that, because writing, it can be quite a lonely profession, can't it?
Yeah, by definition, we spend most of our time with a blank screen or a blank page in front of us, and it's, you know, you can go insane quite easily, and you know, I'm a sociable creature. I like to get out. It's nice to meet people.
And how did you feel when you were first published? Take us back to that moment.
Whew. The keynote was euphoria, definitely. Mixed in with a sort of slight element of anxiety in that, you know, what would the reviews be like? What would sales be like? Because this was the first time. I just left my sensible job. What would life be like as a self-employed writer? Could I make a living by it? And then there were the sort of things about what would my friends think? Because if you write fiction, you reveal quite a lot about yourself, inevitably. And I thought, they're going to look for themselves in the pages, and they certainly did, to see fictional versions of themselves. And then what would my parents thought? And I can tell you what my mother said. She said, "It was a very nice book, dear, but a shame about the swearing."
And what would you say John Moore's lasting legacy is?
Well, I think there are two elements to that. The first legacy, and for me personally the most important, are the books. I know they've got a permanent place on my shelves. I read and reread them, and I think about them quite a lot. They're part of my mental furniture. The second element, and I think this is the, as it were, the more public element, is that he's of course one of the founding figures of the Cheltenham Literary Festival, or what became the Cheltenham Literary Festival, which is this huge thing that's brought so many books, so many authors to so many people over the years. And I think, you know, if he were alive today, he should be incredibly proud of that achievement too.